Could Phil Knight swoop in and salvage the Portland WNBA expansion team bid? Why is 13 teams potentially disastrous in the W instead of 14? It's time for part 2 of my chat with Sean Highkin, the Locked On Women's Basketball podcast. It starts right now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
Good! You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
On to women's basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your hosts on this program. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next. I help with the Next social media strategy. And I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. I want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next, a place where we cover women's basketball all the time, and we tell the stories that need to be told each and every day. Subscribe now to support the staff at the Next that works oh so hard to bring you this coverage that matters oh so much. It's $9 a month or $72 per year. Also, we have been breaking records here at Locked On Women's Basketball. We continue to grow each month in our listens, and that's all thanks to you, dear listener. Remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase Locked On NBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Okay, so our roadmap for part 2. Our discussion here continues discussing Phil Knight's influence in the Portland basketball scene, and then we're going to dive into Howard Megdal's reporting in the 9 newsletter that explains why 13 teams rather than 14 in the WNBA might not be the best idea. All right, I'll kick it to part 2. Phil Knight has been, very supportive of Sabrina Ionescu. He's an Oregon alumnus. Obviously the relationship that she had with him that sort of led to her signature shoe. It's very interesting to me as to why his name does not come up. It's come up for the Trailblazers, but it hasn't come up for a potential WNBA expansion team. And so the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay. If Portland wants to salvage this bid and not let it go, kaput, is that someone who people can start having conversations with?
So a couple things there. I don't know if Phil Knight, yes, Phil Knight is a big, advocate for, you brought up Sabrina Ionescu and, like Naomi Osaka and like other people who are like big, faces of Nike. He is interested in, and this is not to say like Phil Knight is anti, anything, but he's pro specific athletes that make Nike money. Like, he's not I want to own a WNBA team because I'm a huge advocate for women's sports. He's I'm gonna, we'll give Sabrina Ionescu a signature shoe because she's really popular and that'll make Nike a bunch of money. Like, I don't think it's like, there's that part of it. And the other part of it is, and you brought up his interest in the Blazers. That has been pretty contentious because originally he made an offer of $2 billion, which is, pretty laughable when you consider what NBA teams are going for. When Jody Allen and Bert Kolde, the vice chair of Vulcan, who's also kind of helping run the estate, said no. Phil Knight planted a story in the New York Post about how toxic Jody Allen was and how, I mean, it's gotten into this really personal thing to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if because the Blazers' stance this whole time has been that eventually the team is going to have to get sold, but it's not for sale right now.
I see.
I would not be surprised if they wait until the day after Phil Knight dies to put the team up for sale just so he doesn't get it. Like, that's how contentious the relationship is between the Blazers and Phil Knight right now. And so from a money standpoint, yeah, like Phil Knight can put, him paying $50 million for the expansion fee for a WNBA team, that's like me or you paying $50 for something. Like, he's got the money, but
that's exactly my point.
I don't think he would be interested. I think if it was yes, Jody Allen will sell you the Blazers, then do you want to pay an extra $50 million to have a WNBA team also? And now you own all the basketball teams in Portland. I think that's something he would be interested in, but I don't think he would really have a lot of interest in owning a WNBA team and being a tenant of the building that the Blazers own when he's also trying to buy the Blazers and they very publicly are not interested in selling specifically to him. So there's kind of that dynamic of it also. I get it. Like, obviously he would be, in a lot of people's minds, a dream owner for a lot of reasons because of how powerful he is and how big Nike is, and Nike has invested in the WNBA. But from that standpoint, just because of the dynamics between him and the current Blazers ownership and some of the way that publicly a lot of that stuff has unfolded with his interest in buying the team, I don't see that happening. I do know that, and I don't know any specific names right now, but I do know that there are efforts currently being made behind the scenes by Senator Wyden and by other people to try to put together more, people with money who are willing to, come together to put up the $50 million to try to salvage it. And I don't know whether that is going to be successful or not. My guess would be no, but I also feel like, this is also part of kind of why it's a little bit weird that the reasoning that Kathy gave publicly was what it was, because now she kind of backed herself into a corner. Because let's say that the senator can put together a group of, 3 people who can put up the $50 million, and now suddenly it's back on. Is she now then going to have to walk back all the stuff she said about the arena? Because the stuff about the arena hasn't changed. Like, that's why. And this is the thing is the thing is. And again, I brought this up a couple times. The real reason to me, and this is just, and again, I don't know Kirk Brown. I've very briefly introduced myself to him once. I don't know the guy. I don't know his finances. I don't know where his head is at. The more obvious thing, like, I do not buy that Kirk Brown walked away from this entire deal over a disagreement with the league office about what they're going to name the team. Like, that just doesn't add up to me, that you're going to say...
these are people who have big egos.
But I think, again, the bigger thing to bring up is that his company has fallen in value by 55% in the last year. He might just not have as much money as he had a year ago when he was starting to talk about wanting to bring a WNBA team here. He just might, like, he might have looked at, the business stuff, and, a year ago when his company was doing really well, it made sense to do. And then his company's lost a ton of money over the last year. And so now maybe, and that's the part that nobody's really talked about. We've heard about all the stuff about, like, oh, the league didn't like, what he wanted to call the team, or the league didn't like that he, was invested in this youth basketball gym or whatever else. I think the bigger thing is he just might not have as much money as he used to have. And so he decided from his standpoint it wasn't worth how much money he was going to have to put into this.
That's a fair point. I mean, I had heard that he had sold the stock and he received a pretty penny for it, but that's more getting into the weeds here. Before we sign off, I do want to talk about why 13 teams for the WNBA could be a potential disaster. But first, I do want to remind y'all about PrizePicks. They are our obvious show sponsor, so we want to tell y'all about them. So obviously the NBA and college basketball season are here, and that is men's and women's college basketball. And now you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce and Caitlin Clark at a 10.5 combo of 3 points made and receptions. It's a little confusing, but it's cool. You want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz. You can find community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, the player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Thank you, PrizePicks. Okay. So I think something that we need to touch upon before we go is this notion of what exactly happens to the WNBA if they cannot salvage the Portland bid or if another market is able to be expansion team number 14. I want to say, and I will attach this link in the show notes, Howard Megdal, who you all are very familiar with listening to here on this podcast, he wrote and reported a little bit about how the WNBA has been responding to this chaos with Portland. Front office members in the WNBA, including those in ownership groups, have been reacting with bewilderment, anger, and concern. I mean, I think the bewilderment was sort of the same emotion that the Trailblazers folks had. But I think while those feelings are valid, you know, from the Blazers and from WNBA front office members and folks in ownership groups, I think the reason for the, I guess, anxiety, I think that's really important. And so Howard spoke about how what could possibly happen if you just have 13 teams in the WNBA and if the Golden State team is the only expansion team that comes in 2025. And what can happen there is that could offset the competitive advantage in the WNBA. And so when you have one team trying to get players from an expansion draft, and we don't know what the CBA is going to be amended to when it comes to players that are cored. Can players that are cored just say, nope, I do not want to be cored anymore. I want to put myself up for being claimed by one of the expansion teams. Those markers have not been put down yet. And so also 13 is an odd number. Is there a sports league in this country that operates with an odd number when it comes to playoffs or even just scheduling in general? So
the NBA did for a long time.
Oh,
like from when they expanded in 95 with the two Canadian teams, that was 28 and 29, and then when the Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans, there were, I think, you know, it was like 3 years between then and when the Charlotte Bobcats came in 2000. I think it was either 04 or 05. But there was a time when the NBA had an odd number of teams. I think I understand why people want there to be an even number of teams. I'm just saying it has been done.
Yeah, you know, I think the other issue which Howard also discussed is the league has been expecting this large influx of money at around the year of 2025, a new media rights deal. And so in addition to these expansion fees for potentially two teams. And so if the WNBA enters a situation where they're not getting $100 million for, you know, expansion fees, that puts the league in a bit of a bind. Kathy Engelbert has been trying to gather up as much as she can bargain when it comes to a new CBA. I don't see any reason why WNBA players would want to let this agreement continue through 2027. I mean, they're going to opt out. There have been too many discussions about how travel is not what it should be. Charter flights, that issue could be solved with some of that money. So that is a definite concern. I think that's much more of a concern rather than an, odd number of teams, to be quite honest. It's
right.
the money.
Right. That's like you know more about the the way the WNBA, CBA, and some of the rules about like the salary cap and what the expansion draft would look like in free agency. I will admit I don't know as much about that in the WNBA as I do in the NBA. Like, so I can't really speak to that end of it, but I will say that they got a $50 million buy-in from the Warriors. They were planning on getting a $50 million buy-in from the Portland ownership group. One of those two $50 million buy-ins disappeared. And as much as we were talking earlier about how when you compare it to what like men's sports league teams go for, $50 million is nothing. For a league like the WNBA that's still growing and is in the position it's in financially, $50 million is a pretty significant amount of money to think you were getting and then not end up getting. That's a lot of money that's going to be spent. Like you said, that could go towards, chartering flights for all the teams, which should have been done years ago, but that's something that hasn't been done, and that's something that expansion money could go to. Like, better hotels for them to stay at on the road, now, better practice facilities, well, like, whatever. There's a lot of things that the WNBA could do with that money that they're now not going to get. And, I mean, to me, just watching this kind of from the outside and, being tapped into it from the Portland end, I think the mistake that they made was not waiting until they had both teams 100% locked in before announcing it, because they announced about a month ago, they announced the Bay Area team. They had the whole press conference. They announced it, and she said then, like, oh, we're going to add a second team for 2025 so we can bring it up to an even number. Mm-hmm. You should have had every single thing signed and finalized with Portland before you even announced the Bay Area team. Like, you shouldn't have announced anything until you had both of them done. Because now, like, maybe they were comfortable doing it because they thought that the Portland thing was just a formality to get done, which, to be fair, I thought it was a formality to get done. I had been hearing since July that it was a done deal. I'd been hearing, again, I heard in August that Nike was already making, advertisements for it, and, there was dates for press conferences. Like, it was basically a done deal, but obviously, as we know, basically a done deal doesn't mean actually a done deal. So now that this falls apart, it's like your options are either to go into the 2025 season with only 13 teams, which, you can probably speak better than I can to why that's not ideal from a competitive standpoint, or you have to scramble to put a 14th team together just to have a 14th team, and then it's not going to be in as much of a position to succeed as a Portland team would have been, as far as like the team that I read Howard's story yesterday, and the two cities that he mentioned were Charlotte and Denver, because I think Toronto was the other one that like the league was really interested in going to, and they sold out that exhibition game in the spring, and there's a ton of interest there, but the MLSE group just like decided they didn't want to pay for it, so that was out. Like, that would have been the obvious like backup plan, but that's obviously out if they aren't going to pay for it. But like. But like Denver, I actually know quite a bit about that market because I know a lot of people there, and the Nuggets just won a championship and nobody there cares. Like, it's not like, if it's not the Broncos, like it's not going to have it. Like, I don't think it would be set up to succeed in Denver just because nothing except for the Broncos is really like has the kind of interest in that market that you would want it to have. Charlotte, I don't know quite as much about. I guess the Hornets are pretty popular there, so. And, like, they're another team, another city that had a team back in the day with the Charlotte Sting that was one of the teams that folded. So there is, I guess there's, I suppose that could work. But it's like, whatever it is, like, they're never going to find, and maybe I'm just a little bit biased because I live here, but they are never going to find a better market to expand to than Portland as far as checking all the boxes of what the level of fan interest would be, the NBA team that owns the arena being totally supportive of there being a team playing there, just, balancing out. And honestly, you probably want to balance out geographically, because there's like most of the WNBA teams right now are either on the East Coast or the Midwest. As far as like West Coast adjacent cities, there's Seattle, there's LA, there's Phoenix, there's Las Vegas. That's it. Like, and then, you're going to add the Bay Area, and then you're going to add, and, if you added Portland, that kind of balances out how, like, there's New York, there's Atlanta, there's Connecticut, and then, you have a couple teams in the Midwest with, like, Chicago, Indiana, Minnesota. Like, geographically, as far when you want to talk about, like, making it easier on a travel standpoint, like, having a Portland and Seattle teams like, that's a 3-hour drive, so that's that's going to make the travel stuff a lot easier. Portland to LA is a 2-hour flight. Portland to Vegas is a 2-hour flight. Like, it makes more sense to add a West Coast team. And then again, like the stuff I said before about, like, what the fan support would be here, and how popular the Thorns are, how popular the Oregon and Oregon State women's basketball team is. They're not going to find a better place to expand to than Portland. And I would be worried if I were somebody who was, like, concerned about, like, the future success of the WNBA. I would be worried that they had the best possible place they could have expanded to, and just kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, fumbled the bag. And then wherever they end up going next, like, you don't know that the ownership group is going to be as vetted as this was, or you don't know that, like, they're going to have the infrastructure in place, or they're going to have the facilities, or they're going to have to throw all that stuff together at the last minute, and that might lead to the team maybe being set up to fail more so than it would be in Portland.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the world today. Unrest in the Middle East, natural disasters around the United States, and more. These can simply lead to supply chain shortages for medications, or the inability to get the meds that you need in a timely manner. Don't be unprepared. Your health is wealth. But there's a solution. The Jace Case is a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly infections. You can also customize your case and add additional life-saving meds based on you and your family's unique needs. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jace handles everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. You can even buy a gift card for your family or loved ones so that they can get a Jace case of their own. Go to jacemedical.com and enter the code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jacemedical.com. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We really appreciate it. Now, tomorrow, we are going to have our host, Missy Heindrich, back with the one and only Matthew Walter, and they are going to preview the West Coast Conference and discuss Matthew's latest story that was live from Las Vegas for the Hall of Fame series on the opening day of the women's college basketball season. But all right, let's get back to our program. And that's exactly what Kathy Engelbert wanted to try to rectify with her term as commissioner. Before expanding, she spoke about we need all of the teams in the league to be healthy financially before we can move forward. And I could go on a completely different podcast about how we've seen that evolve. The ownership group in Chicago, while I've been critical of it in the past, there has been more capital thrown into the Chicago sky. You're sort of seeing the Dallas Wings trying to get the Dallas Mavericks involved to try to create a little bit more of a cash flow there. I could go on and on. There's been better investment in Indiana with the Fever and new facilities.
Phoenix just built a facility, right?
Phoenix is building a facility. But anyway, so
I mean, I think a lot of it is also just that, you saw what the Aces and the Liberty, like their ownership groups just pumped all this money and spent all this money in free agency and built all these facilities and all this stuff. And then they're the two teams that played in the finals. And they were also the ones, I remember a couple of years ago, Howard had this story in SI about how Joe Tsai was trying to charter a flight, and then some of the other owners complained about it. It's like, I think some of these newer owners that are coming in, and my understanding had been that this was going to be Kirk Brown's attitude towards it also, was he was just going to throw a ton of money into it and like try to make it into a first-class product. And I think it was getting to the point where like the teams that are having the most success are doing that. And so these other teams like have to get their weight up, so to speak. Like,
yes. Absolutely. And that's why free agency has flown the way it has. But thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. I want to give a huge thank you to Sean for hopping on the show today. I learned so many things about Portland and this whole story. And I'm sure you did too. Follow him at Highkin, which is his last name on all the interwebs. That is HIGHKIN, for those of y'all not watching on YouTube, and read his work at therosegardenreport.com. This has been Jackie Powell.
And Sean Highkin.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.